Hi, I'm Bee, and I'm going to take you along with me on a 4-day road trip exploring off the beaten path areas of Joshua Tree National Park and Mojave National Preserve. In this video, I'll be sharing how I planned my trip, including the backcountry roads I drove on and where I camped, so you have everything you need if you want to do the same trip too. I recently got the 2025 Subaru Outback Wilderness, and I'm excited to test out some of its capabilities, so I'll be driving down backcountry roads or dirt roads to get to these locations. Before I go over my itinerary, let me show you how I set up the car for car camping. This portion of the video is sponsored by Subaru. So first I laid down this blanket right here. The bumper of your car can get pretty dusty, especially when you're driving down backcountry roads. So it is nice to have this as a cover because it helps keep me clean and all of my stuff a little cleaner. Then I have my sleep system. So I have a foam pad, an inflatable sleeping pad, and my sleeping bag on top with a camp pillow in the back. And then I have all of my gear and cooking stuff and food on the other side. I have my French press over here because I just had coffee. And then I have a power bank. This power bank can charge pretty much anything because it has so many different outlet options. And I can charge it with my car in this port right here. So as I'm driving, it recharges itself. I have a little pocket over here for just kind of miscellaneous things. Then I have 2 canvas bags. One of them is full of food and snacks that I'll be eating, and the other one is my cooking supplies, my camp stove, a bowl, utensils, my mug, just things that you might need to cook. And then I have a cooler with all of the refrigerated items that I'll be cooking throughout the week, or just have cold drinks, ice for my water. And at night, it's nice to use that as like a night table. I'll leave things on top of it at night that I might want to reach, like my notebook, my reading book, my cell phone. You can also leave your keys in the cup holder, so it's nice to have that as a little night table. And I also have some string lights set up on the inside. I don't know if you could see them, but those are solar string lights that I hang up on the inside. They make a nice night light, and I can read with them at night, so that's really nice to have. And then I also have these mesh window covers, so I can leave the windows cracked and no bugs will come in. I love a nice breeze when I'm sleeping, so I have the windows cracked with the window covers over them at night, and then I get some fresh air. I always leave the driver's seat clear. This way, if I need to leave my campground in a rush in the middle of the night, or just for like safety reasons, I can hop into the front seat and drive away in a hurry if I need to. Also, keep your keys somewhere the same place every time so you know exactly where they are and can grab them in a rush and they won't get lost. It's easy to kind of lose your keys in the jumble when you're coming in and out of your car and moving things around. So choosing that one spot to keep your keys and always leaving them there is a good idea. And I do also like to bring a camp chair, so when I'm not like in the back of my car, I can leave it out and sit outside of my car, get some sun, and then when I'm driving, I just fold it up and throw it on top. And I didn't really need to buy anything new for my setup here. This is all gear that I've already pretty much owned from camping in general. The only thing I did buy are the window covers, so you can really make do with what you've got. I love my car so much. This is the setup. It's very comfortable. I've had 3 really great night sleeps so far and anticipate many more. So that is how I set up my Subaru Outback Wilderness for car camping. Happy trails! So I set out in the afternoon from San Diego, and I drove about 2.5 hours to the Black Rock Campground in Joshua Tree National Park. You do not need to pass an entrance gate to get to the campground, but you will need a national park pass to enter the national park if you're going through the main entrance. So I had reserved Black Rock Campground on Recreation.gov. It is an established campground, so there's running water, sinks, flushing toilets, a camp host, and a visitor center. Everything is nearby. It's also very close to the town of Joshua Tree, so you have access to shops and restaurants, gas, and amenities if you need them. Being spring break, the campgrounds do book up well in advance, so you have slim pickings if you are planning a little bit closer to the date. I would definitely recommend booking your campgrounds ahead of time if you're planning on staying at established campgrounds. So after checking out the campground, I decided to explore my first backcountry road. So I went down Covington Flat Road, which is not too far from the campground actually. The road honestly was not so bad. It was pretty sandy and there were a couple of kind of rocky areas where you got to watch out for the kind of bigger, pointier rocks that might pop your tire. So you just got to drive with caution, and I like to turn on the X mode in my car. You feel the X mode when you turn it on and it just kind of feels like it has a little bit more control of the road. So I followed Covington Flat Road for a bit and then I turned off and followed the signs for Eureka Peak. And I did get there a little early for sunset, but it would be a beautiful place to watch the sunset because you get a really clear view of like the direction where the sun is setting. So I would definitely recommend Eureka Peak for sunset. Just be mindful about driving back in the dark on those dirt roads because I'm newer to driving on dirt roads, backcountry roads. I did not want to be driving them in the dark, so I made sure to leave before it started getting dark, and I made it back to my campground for dinner. So I made my dinner, had a little campfire, and just hung out in the trunk of my car, relaxing, and went to bed. My goal was to get up before the sunrise the next morning and be able to watch the sunrise from in the park, so I did go to bed pretty early. Now, the next day, my goal was to explore the backcountry roads that were in the main area of Joshua Tree National Park. So I got up early before the sun rose and I drove in through the west entrance. It's nice to get there really early because then there's no line, especially that entrance tends to have like a backed up line to get in, especially if you don't have a park pass. It can be a while before you actually get into the park. Also, parking can get difficult in the park, especially on weekends or holidays. So be mindful of that. Getting in there at like 6 a.m. when I did, there was nobody around. So I drove right through and I watched the sunrise as I was driving through the park. It was a really beautiful sunrise. The desert always has the best sunrises and sunsets, so I was very excited to be in such a beautiful place for it. Glad I woke up early. I went straight to Barker Dam. I figured I would start with one of the main areas that do become a little more difficult to park at later in the day. So I started my day with a hike around the Barker Dam Loop, which was a beautiful and quiet trail, nice to have to myself. As I was getting back to my car, people were starting to arrive, so I decided my next move was to explore the backcountry roads. So I kind of started exploring the Queen Valley Road and ended up having to take a little detour on Bighorn Pass. Then I went up Odell Road to Queen Mountain, hiked a little bit up there, and then drove straight down and out. Almost across from the main road is the entrance to the Geology Tour Road. I did find a couple of trails on All Trails that are off of that road, but they didn't actually end up being real established trails. They're just kind of more like a bushwhack style of hiking. So if you wanted to kind of wander off in a direction following a general path that somebody marked on All Trails to explore some of the mountains and hills in the area, you could do that, but it was really nice just driving the road on its own. I enjoyed the ride. I drove the Geology Tour Road, making a couple of stops. There is one, I think, backcountry trailhead board along that road that I stopped at. I saw somebody airing down their tires because once you get to the actual loop part at the end of the road, for one, it's a very sandy road, so it's deep sand, and on the end loop, the road gets very uneven with a lot of rocks that feel like you're going to pop your tire. So I was actually getting kind of nervous the deeper I was going because it feels less and less like an actual road the further you go. So that was making me nervous, definitely testing my limits. My car proved to be able to handle that without a problem. So I made it through safely and without any issues, which was really nice. X mode came in handy for sure. And then after the geology tour road, I did stop and explore some of like the boulders along the side of the road, wandering around a little bit and just kind of enjoying the scenery. But then I hopped back in the car and I drove north to the Queen Valley Road again. And this time I took the Queen Valley Road to Desert Queen Mine and I explored that mine, which was really cool, honestly. It was much bigger than I was expecting because sometimes these mines are just a couple holes in the ground. But if you really explore the area, you find like, I don't know, 10 different they're all gated off for the most part. You can't go inside of them because, for one, safety reasons, but for two, there are bat species that like to live in there, so you don't want to disturb them and their habitat. So very cool place to explore, Desert Queen Mine. And then from the same trailhead, so you can leave your car where it's parked, I also did the Lucky Boy Vista Loop. It ended up being about 6 miles, including my exploration of the mine. So after finishing my hike, I decided to head into town for an early dinner and then head back to Eureka Peak on the Covington Flat Road for sunset. I didn't end up staying all the way till sunset again, just because I was nervous about driving the backcountry roads in the dark. But I did stay there until the sun was starting to set so I can enjoy the sunset on my drive back while there was still some daylight. And I made it back to Black Rock Campground, enjoyed a quiet night, and woke up early to hit my next location, which was Amboy Crater in Mojave Trails National Monument. So I did wake up pretty early, like with the sunrise at Black Rock Campground, and then got some coffee in town as I drove towards Mojave. And it's actually located on BLM land, so you are able to park for free overnight and camp near the trailhead. Amboy Crater is about a 5-mile loop, I want to say, especially if you do the entire perimeter of the crater. It's a really cool volcanic crater that you hike up the edge and around the rim of. You can also go inside of it. Every time I've been there, it's been very windy and hot. So maybe be prepared with some layers, because with the wind, you don't feel the heat as much, but it's definitely strong. And the volcanic rock also radiates some heat, especially in the summertime. So I would not recommend visiting most of these places, honestly, in the summer. Definitely check out the weather when you're planning your trip. That is something that will make or break your trip. Even driving down the dirt roads, you want to be cautious of flash floods or just like, has it rained recently? If it has, usually the ground will be a little bit more packed and easier to drive on. So just things to be conscious of when you're planning your trip. The Amboy Crater Trail is located on Route 66, which is a historic route. So that's a pretty cool thing to check out if you're into that history there. So Route 66. And then I drove straight to the Hole in the Wall campground area. There is a visitor center and a few trails that stem from the campground. I again reserved this campground site on Recreation.gov, and I actually really like this campground. Hole in the Wall campground is a beautiful campground. You do have neighbors not too far away from you, but there are pit toilets sprinkled around the campground, and it's just got a really beautiful 360 view. And the trails that stem from the campground are really cool as well. In this same day, since I got to the campground pretty early in the afternoon, I decided to hike the Barber Peak Loop, which is about a 7-mile loop. It doesn't actually take you to the peak like the name implies. It's a loop around the mountain or hill. Really beautiful rocks too, like observing the surface of the mountain as you're hiking around it. You see so much texture and like little caves and wind tunnels. It's also an area where cows are grazing. So I actually saw a small herd of cows grazing while I was hiking around, and there's lots of poop everywhere. So once you start seeing some fresh cow poop, you know that they're somewhere nearby. So they do blend in with the surroundings. So if you're not paying attention, you might miss them. Now, I hiked this trail counterclockwise. So I did most of the loop first and then ended with probably the coolest section, which is part of the Rings Loop Trail, and it connects to the visitor center. And what a awesome part of this trail. The Rings Loop Trail also is a 1 mile loop that I actually ended up doing in the morning. So I can tell why it's called Hole in the Wall. So for one, when you're on the Barber Peak Loop and you're going counterclockwise, as you're coming towards the visitor center, you start walking towards this giant rock wall, and it's like, how am I going through this? This must be a dead end. And as you get closer and closer, you start seeing a crack in the wall where the trail ends up going through it, and you pop out on the other side. So it's like, oh, there's a hole in the wall that you need to go through. But also because there's like thousands of holes all over the rocks. Some of them are big enough to crawl into, like little caves. Others are just like little tiny holes. It kind of made me wish I was into climbing so that I could explore the walls and scramble up a little bit and explore. One of these days I will get into climbing and learn how to do that. There are little metal rings that help you to climb up the Slot Canyon to get through to the other side. So you don't really need to have any rock climbing skills per se to do this trail, but there is like a little scrambling section where you're climbing up the rings, hence the Rings Loop Trail. So that was really cool. My favorite part of the trail for sure. And after that, I went back to the campsite and made myself some dinner. And as the day went on, the wind really picked up and was blowing like really strong gusts to the point that nobody was hanging out like outside of their vehicles or their tents. The wind was so strong. I luckily was able to cook dinner before the wind picked up and then was just hanging out in the trunk of my car. But I was pretty tired that night, so I again fell asleep pretty early, shortly after the sunset, wanting to again wake up with the sunrise in the morning. And I did wake up pretty early around sunrise time. I made myself some coffee at the campsite. The wind had died down a bit. It was still a little breezy, but it was, manageable. So after having my coffee, I drove over to the Rings Loop trailhead and figured I would start my day by hiking the 1 mile loop of the Rings Loop Trail. So I did that as the sun rose in the sky and started warming things up, and it ended up being a really beautiful day by the time I was finishing the trail. And then I drove from there about an hour and a half, I want to say. I don't really remember the name of the roads, but I drove to the Lava Tubes trailhead. That was down a backcountry road, and I had the trailhead to myself. I actually wasn't sure if I was at the trailhead or not, but when I checked on All Trails, it showed like this is where the trail starts from. So that's where I parked my car. It was a really short, like half of a mile round trip trail, and you kind of just start hiking through this barren landscape with volcanic rocks surrounding you. And then seemingly out of nowhere, all of a sudden there's just a hole in the ground, and you can see like 30, 40 feet down to the bottom of this like chamber. And then you hike a little bit further and another hole in the ground that has a metal ladder or staircase kind of that you can walk down into. I had seen pictures of the lava tube online, so I knew to bring my headlamp. And you go in, and seemingly at first there is like not much going on in there, but you see this really like low tunnel, and you have to squat and kind of waddle and crawl almost through, and you pop out on the other side and you're in that chamber that you were looking down from above. The first time you go in there, especially being all by yourself, you're like, ooh, where am I going? Like, am I going to get lost in here? Does this have an end? Does it keep getting smaller? It's just that chamber there. It doesn't really go much further, but that is a really cool area to check out. Definitely underrated. I feel like I never really hear about this trail, so that was super cool. And then from there, I tried to hike the Lava Beds Trail, which I found on All Trails, and both of the ways that Google Maps took me ended up being not the right way. One of them just kind of like dissipated to nothing, and then the other trail, I think I took a wrong turn somewhere and ended up at a dead end. But the dead end was a really cool backcountry campsite, so I'm definitely going to mark that on my map so I can maybe use it for future reference. And so I decided to give up before I ended up in an even stickier situation and decided to drive straight to Kelso Dunes. I have stayed at Kelso Dunes several times before. The road to get to Kelso Dunes is, I think, 4 or 5 miles down a dirt road, but it's a 2-wheel drive dirt road, so most cars are able to get to the trailhead and the backcountry campground that is at the end of the road. And I happened to know about this singular site off the side of Kelso Dunes Road that has a fire pit, and it's my favorite campsite because it is away from the other campsites where they're all kind of together in the same area. And if you know me, you know I like to be alone, enjoy my alone time, my peace and quiet. I don't like to disturb other people, so I like having this area to myself where I could just talk out loud freely with you and not worry about bothering anybody. And just the peace and quiet in general is really nice. I don't like to be bothered when I'm out here trying to be alone, you know? So luckily, when I got here, nobody was here in my campsite, so I claimed it for myself. But it was a little bit too windy to really have a fire the last 2 nights. It is a fire hazard to have a fire when it's really windy because it just kind of blows the burning embers and coals all over the place. Especially if you're camped near other people, that can be really dangerous and burn holes in people's tents and equipment and whatnot. So I didn't end up having a fire, but I did get here early enough to go explore the sand dunes. So from this campsite, the closest pit toilet is the pit toilet at the trailhead. So I think it's about a 1/4 of a mile walk. So I left my car here to claim my campsite, walked to the trailhead, and then I explored the dunes. A bunch of clouds were rolling in around that time, so the winds were picking up, and I was nervous that it might rain a little bit, but I'm not too worried about being in this area during a little bit of rain. So I hiked all the way to the top of the dunes, and as soon as you get to the crest on the other side, it is just wind blasting you and sand blasting you. It's like being pelted with a bunch of needles, but very cool to be up there and see from the other side. So altogether, the trail from the trailhead to the top of the tallest sand dune and back is about 3 miles. I want to say it's like 1.5 miles to the top. But it feels so much longer than that because when you're hiking through sand, every step forward is a half a step back and you go so much slower. Also, you're not really following a real trail because it's hard to mark a trail through the sand. So you're just kind of following footprints and a general direction towards a specific spot. I'm going there, so I'm going to walk towards there. You'll figure it out once you're up there. You can also see the path back once you're up there looking back towards the trailhead. So I did that last night. I made myself some dinner. I hung out, just enjoying the view, watched the colors change in the sky, and had a restful night. Read my book in bed, and honestly, I slept through the sunrise this morning. I woke up and the sun was already up. I have been sleeping really well. I've realized that I've gotten so comfortable with these trips and solo traveling and car camping and tent camping and backpacking that I sometimes get my best night's sleep when I'm out here. You might not think that, sleeping in your car or sleeping in a tent on the ground is comfortable, but once you've been doing it for a little while, it is unmatched because you wake up in a beautiful place, you hear the sounds of nature, and it just means that you're having a good time. It's my preferred way of waking up and going to sleep. That's how I planned my trip, so I hope you enjoyed, and if I missed anything or you have any questions, let me know in the comments. I'd be happy to answer anything else about this trip that you need to know. Thanks so much for watching. I love you all, and happy trails. I hope you got all that. And maybe stay there for sunrise, sunset. Oh my gosh.